Okay. Now pay attention for once. All right.
Hello, Carpe Diem. Hope you're seizing the day and having a great meeting. I wish I was there with you guys.
So I've been asked in the past, exactly how did TriMed come to being? What's the story behind TriMed?
What happened was when we first started TriMed, we had basically run another company into the ground with hip plates. The hip fracture market, as we were approaching, was a fairly mature market, and what we were bringing to the market, although it was a great product, was not a good business. It just was not a good business. We couldn't sell much of it all. But while we were going through the pains of trying to build this business, Rob had some ideas about wrist fractures, and he thought, well, you know, there's really nothing out there to do ORIF for a wrist fracture that works.
I've always been dissatisfied with the way we treated distal radius fractures. And when I was in residency, if we saw bad C3, a badly comminuted fracture, my chief at the time taught me, well, the way we treat those is we put them in an external fixator and we inform the patient. We make sure we tell them on the front end that in a year, they're going to end up with a fusion. That was the standard. And so we accepted that, and we thought that was just the natural history of these bad injuries. Well, I'm in private practice, so it's a little bit different. And I have some older ladies, a little older, maybe 65, 70-year-old, come in with a really badly distal radius fracture. And I said, you know, we're going to put some pins and a fixator on it, and this will be the first procedure. In about a year, we'll do your fusion because it's probably not going to work that well for you, and you won't be able to move your wrist, but it won't hurt so much. And she looked at me and she said, Dr. Medoff, we can put a man on the moon. It's just a wrist fracture. Why can't you fix it? And I started thinking that maybe this lady had something, that maybe we weren't doomed to a bad result with these bad articular fractures. And came up with this idea of taking the way we were doing it, which was using a lot of pins, and trying to improve the fixation. We knew that it was difficult to use screws and plates in these small, little, tiny periarticular fragments. But I thought maybe what we could do is take the K-wires, those small K-wires, and stiffen them a little bit. And so the first idea I had was coming out with a pin plate.
Robert takes a napkin, so this is your typical napkin story, and starts drawing out and showing us all the different fracture patterns for wrist fractures. And he starts talking about, you know, maybe we can do something like a fork, or, you know, something like a wire or K-wire. And he starts drawing this out, and he says, and then in my naive business sense, I go, well, how many wrist fractures are there? And he goes, well, there are 250,000 wrist fractures a year. And I said, that's a lot of wrist fractures. Maybe we should design something for this.
I certainly didn't think that we would be as successful as we are today. I think we saw a great opportunity, though, to do something smart with our technology. No other company seemed to bother with wrist fractures. It was a huge volume, and I think it was good for us that it had been neglected so much or so long.
At the time, I thought, you know, this is different from the standard type of open reduction internal fixation. I really need to give this a name to describe it. And so in the mid-90s, I came up with the term fragment-specific fixation to describe, you know, having these kind of small super implants on each of the little fragments working cooperatively to give a load-sharing construct.
You know, in those days, we just had the fragment-specific distal radius fracture product. It was basically pin plates and wire forms. And there were a bunch of frustrated hand surgeons around, and they were extremely unhappy with the pie plate, external fixation, and all those kind of things. They wanted something different.
I called up Rob and Lars, and I said, Rob and Lars, what do you want to do? And they said, oh, we need to go find another company to rep the product. I said, but wait a second, we have all this inventory. It's all paid for. We have sales. The sales are coming in faster than we ever got on the previous company that we had. And we have money in the bank. Why don't we just see what happens?
We basically visited smart hand surgeons, and I guess our technology fell in good hands with them, because they saw that this was a way to fix problems which they had treating their patients.
What was your first impression of TriMed?
Yeah, it was complete nonsensical junk, honestly.
First impression of TriMed was my first time meeting Rob Medoff with my co-fellows in 2012. The first thing Rob asked us to do after introductions was to ditch our neckties.
$1997 when I first went to a TriMed local, regional Sawbones cadaver session. It was being taught by Rob Medoff and Reed Abrams. And I went and observed as a young hand staff at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego. After seeing a few of the x-rays and seeing the way they taught them, and how you need to do these multiple incisions, I basically said, over my dead body, will I ever use this crap?
I went to a meeting that was being held in Chicago at a hotel where Lars and Rob were holding like a surgeon workshop. And it turns out I was the only one that showed up. And they were showing me this basically tiddlywink crap. And I didn't think it actually had any future.
Walking down the street from my Fleabag hotel, and this blonde guy with a Swedish accent grabs my arm and pulls me into a motel room, in a strip motel. And I think this is not going to end well. And he says, I want to show you something. And there in the room were the Medoff brothers, Lars, of course, and a bunch of sawbones and what looked like paper clips. And they're twisting and drilling and screwing and all. And I thought, this is totally crazy. And then after they finished putting this distal radius together and handed it to me, and I manipulated it, I realized that it was completely rigid. And that these guys were either onto something important, or this was a whole new way to have fun in the OR and do arts and crafts.
We met at one of the hand meetings. Lars had connected the people and put it together. And we were sitting around a table, and I was presenting my results and my studies and the approaches that we were using. And one of the professors, this was a guy in New York, I'm not going to give you his name, but one of the professors in New York, after I was presenting this, many of the docs, to their credit, said, hey, this is really interesting, we should look at this. But one of the guys, an older guy, stood up and said, I really think this is malpractice. You shouldn't be opening distal radius fractures. You should only be treating with external fixators and pins.
I actually did very good avoiding the TriMed reps. One of the local TriMed reps named Ted DeKeesey kept on bugging me, and I said, fine, I will do it after my board collection period. Well, the afternoon of the day I ended, I opened up my office door, and there is Ted DeKeesey and said, hey, Dr. Shin, you promised. Inside, I'm going, damn. And so I said, fine, I'll try it. Next distal radius comes in. It's a extra articular distal radius, and I said I'd try it. It took me so long. I said I would never, ever use this again until hell freezes over.
Hell freezes over.
Well, 2 weeks later, hell froze over when I got a really smashed intra-articular fracture, and I called Ted up and I go, hey, remember when I said hell will freeze over? Well, can I see your stuff again? And that's when I realized it wasn't the stuff, it wasn't the techniques, but it was me and my unwillingness to learn a new technique. And since then, I've had a very open mind to new techniques and understanding things. And the fragment-specific fixation has revolutionized the way I personally have treated distal radius fractures and has revolutionized how I teach distal radius fractures.
My first impression of TriMed opened my eyes to a new reality of managing wrist fractures that prior to that seemed not possible.
So I tried it on a patient, I don't know, about a month later, and it was pretty much an unmitigated disaster. And it's amazing that I ever did it again. But it's part of the reason is that I didn't use a long enough radial pin plate, which is why it sort of fell apart. But I did get back on that horse, and it turns out it was like the greatest thing I've ever done because it's a really good system. And that was really like in 1999.
When we can convince surgeons to try our systems, we have many situations in the past where surgeons have said, oh, your fragment-specific thing doesn't work. It can't work. It's too flimsy, etc., etc. And then they've tried it, and they see in studies that it works, and they see that it works in their patients. And seeing them converted from non-believers to believers, that's been very, very interesting for us.
As long as we're bringing out new ideas and new products and keep ourselves as the leader in innovative company out there, we have the right people that can get the products out. So we feel we've built up a company to that point.
I would be remiss if I didn't say that the success of the company, I'm only a small part, and we have a tremendous team, a lot of dedicated people here in our organization at different levels, and have taken it to a level that is way beyond anything that I could have ever imagined.
Friendships that I've developed, not only with the TriMed team, but also because of the association with TriMed team, has been invaluable.
Overall, my first impression of TriMed was extraordinary innovation without pretension.
I think about how engaging and creative the company is, and that's really been the way it has been as long as I've known them. I've known Rob personally for a really long time now, and same with Lars, and incredibly nice and engaging people. And that's really what has made it so much fun for me, is that there's this dynamism about how the company is constantly changing to get better, and the equipment constantly improves, because they don't just, it's not just about selling stuff, it's about making products that are better for the patients.
TriMed has been an exemplary company from day one, and over the past 20 years I've tried to generate a practice that cares for patients, similar to how TriMed cares for not only its patients but also its physicians and company representatives.
I think the first thing to realize is it's contributed to my patients' welfare, I think, and it's done so by allowing me to develop a consistent step-by-step approach to different types of distal radius and distal ulnar fractures, and now olecranon and elbow fractures.
Leadership of the company is incredibly creative, and it's a creativity that is sponsored out of the interest of making something better for the patients.
All the listeners, I have worked with many other upper extremity companies, but work aside, I hope you would all agree that TriMed strikes us more as family, friends, colleagues, and innovators.
One of my fondest memories of TriMed is teaching me early on what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
We're still recording, so that's perfect.
That'd be great. Great closer.